Welcome to 3 Minute Warning, a Canadian Football League podcast, a member of the All Sports All Plays network. My name is Dallas Bergen. You can find me on Twitter at CFL Fans Toronto, and I'm with my co-host at Pigskin Punk 13, Bill Beer. Bill's an American football fan who's gone all in on the CFL, and I'm a longtime CFL fan, and together we're sharing our passion for the league in an effort to draw new fans to the CFL. It's a great game, and we want you to check it out. All games are available on ESPN Plus in the United States and on TSN in Canada. So welcome to episode 4 of the 3 Minute Warning. How's it going tonight, Bill?
Oh, it's going great. Going great. We had a Wednesday night game. That kind of put us into a different, our podcast usually is released on Wednesday night. What is the CFL doing to us? Seriously, Wednesday nights? Is this a common thing in the CFL to throw in Wednesday and Tuesday nights?
Yeah, it happens a couple times a year. Having a 9-team league makes scheduling a little bit challenging, even with the bye weeks. And so occasionally we've got a few Wednesday night games throughout the year, and even a Tuesday night next week. And there was also some scheduling due to COVID-19. So we've got a jam-packed week coming up with some midweek games as well. So yeah, it's not a regular, consistent schedule all the time in the CFL. So here we are at halftime. It's Hamilton Tiger Cats 14, Ottawa Red Blacks nothing on a miserable rainy night in Canada's capital of Ottawa. In that game, Hamilton last week coming off a really impressive win over Calgary that saw David Watford manage a safe but mistake-free game plan. And to say Ottawa has struggled this season would be an understatement, having lost 4 straight after opening the season with a win over the Edmonton Elks. What are your thoughts on what you've seen so far tonight, Bill?
Well, we've had a rainy game. I mean, it's poured down at times, so you're going to expect some mistakes to happen. But I can say this much: Ottawa is by far the worst team in the CFL, and it's not close. And I don't know how you fix them. I don't know. This season, I don't know if they're fixable. Do you think bringing in a quarterback would help that team somehow? I mean, we're into week 7, and I mean, we're halfway through the season or more. How do you fix that team for this season? Is there any way?
Yeah, it's looking rough there, and a lot of talk right now about Devlin Duck Hodges being signed to a multi-year, a 3-year contract. So this is someone that they are interested in getting more than a look, but there's consideration for the future there. But, we've seen a lot of a lot of quarterbacks come up to the Canadian Football League, and lots of them, it just never pans out. And the ones that do have success, it quite often takes quite a bit of time. It is a different game, different number of players on the field, different sized field. So learning that CFL game and the CFL offense and everything else can take some time. So those issues right now for Ottawa, I mean, they've made some personnel changes. They've brought in a veteran receiver in Kenny Stafford, hopefully to ignite things a little bit. That resulted in some shuffling of the other receivers, with Nate Bahar moving to the wideout position, and Daniel Peterman, who's been in some ways one of their more reliable receivers, being bumped into a backup role. But I think you need to try things. Having Devontae Dedmon back tonight might give them a spark as a great return specialist and somebody who can do things when he gets a ball in his hands on offense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. And we go into the Ticats team a little bit, and you have David Watford coming off his second start. And I do believe, I don't know what his depth of target is, but I bet that his average is 5 yards or less, because a lot of those throws are like at or behind the line of scrimmage, almost like a screen pass. He's not going down the field, but that might be the stance they're taking with him is not going down the field, making the safe completions, not turning the ball over, running the ball, and they've been successful. I mean, tonight it's hard to say, "Hey, you're going to have a 300-yard passing game in the pouring down rain." It just doesn't usually happen that way. But they did make some plays. Ackland had a long pass that he caught, and he took it down the sideline, and that's how they scored their touchdown. Watford actually threw a touchdown, so that's how they got in. But there's not been a whole lot of offense in this game, and Ottawa has struggled for sure.
Yeah, we're here really trying to sell the CFL, and we're getting a bit of a dud tonight, partly weather and partly because these teams are just having trouble at the quarterback position. Hamilton with injuries to two starting quality quarterbacks in Dane Evans and Jeremiah Masoli. And then the Ottawa Red Blacks, who've just had a tough go. Matt Nichols is no longer the starter there. And Dominic Davis has had opportunities before to be a starter and has been okay, has been a serviceable quarterback. So I think these next few games are his kind of last shot to really grab control of the reins. And if he isn't, then you might see a great number of quarterbacks playing games for Ottawa down the stretch as they look beyond this season. But for Hamilton, I think, that was a surprising win last week over Calgary. And David Watford threw only 2 passes longer than 4 yards. And yet he went 19 of 22 for, 160 yards or something like that. Mistake-free football, no turnovers, no interceptions. And the Hamilton Tiger Cats are a team that can play this kind of conservative and safe offense because they have a great team on all phases of the ball, and their defense can win them games. And so Watford is on his way to doing the same thing he did last week, except a little better. He's got 100 yards in the first half tonight instead of about 70 like he did last week. And his players are coming through. That was a great dance down the sideline by Jalen Ackland. And then on that touchdown, Stephen Dunbar Jr. makes a nice turn back inside, and he's got 4 linemen opening the door to the end zone for him. And so good teams can make big plays out of small plays, and Watford's doing exactly what they've asked of him.
Yes, absolutely. And we're talking about a team that's down their top 2 receivers.
Yeah, that's right.
And
maybe even 3, Devere Posey's a player hasn't played for them yet, but who's been 1,000-yard receiver in this league. And so it's remarkable the injuries that they have with Banks and Addison and Posey.
Because they could have easily struggled and lost last week's game and this week's game. I mean, you never know when you're playing on somebody else's home turf. It's really hard to come into some of these CFL stadiums and win on the road. So yeah. Do you want to get into the games of this past weekend?
Yeah. Let's maybe, since we talked a little bit about Calgary Hamilton, we'll just get into that and cover the other ones quickly, and then we can look at what's up ahead in our CFL fantasy studs and duds. But we already mentioned the aforementioned game between Hamilton and Calgary. That was Hamilton's first win over Calgary in 10 years and 17 contests, I think. And very few people picked Hamilton to win that game last week, partly because Watford was starting and Calgary had bounced back in the game 2 of the Alberta Labor Day Classic against the Elks. And people were really thinking Calgary was going to be able to win that game. As mentioned, Watford went 19 of 22, just a short passing game, lots of dumps and screens, and just checking down, playing safe, and then using his legs to make plays as well. And that was enough to win that game.
Absolutely. And this is kind of crazy stat I'm going to bring up here. They had 43% passing in that game versus run. That's extremely low for the CFL.
It sure is.
That's extremely low. would it surprise you if a team did that all year and made a run? 43% passing. I can't imagine that would be the case.
Yeah, that's an incredible number. Wow.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up a couple things from this game that stood out to me. And one is the special teams of Calgary. They had two, and in the NFL, they call it muffed punts. I don't know what they call it in the CFL. They both look like they bounced off the punt returner's face mask, and it was recovered by, the Ticats. But I don't know if it was the lighting or what that that they struggled with. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is Bo. Bo was struggling as he's been the last few games. He's just not back. He apparently Bo does not know Hamilton, so that's my Bo Jackson reference. No, and Jake Meyer got in the game for the last drive, and he was 9 for 9, 80 yards and 1 touchdown. It almost felt like, to me, it was a showcase to, okay, here's Jake Meyer. Anybody interested in Jake Meyer? I mean, it was a thought. I don't know if that's what they were doing or just basic mop-up duty, but he's looked pretty good.
Yeah, he sure has. Things will get interesting there. I mean, this is definitely still Bo's team, and yet this is a team and an organization that is used to winning, from John Hufnagel, general manager, to Dave Dickinson, head coach, and Bo Levi Mitchell. They are used to winning. They've had winning seasons every year, I think, since 2004. And you could see tempers starting to flare. We don't want to make more drama out of it than it is, but Dave Dickinson and Bo Levi Mitchell were in a bit of a shout with one another. And, I think Bo is putting a lot of pressure on himself right now to try and find the groove. And he feels Jake Meyer breathing down his neck too. His completion rate, I mean, he's been outstanding. They don't have the win-loss record, but Meyer is the future, and how far off the future is in question right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And they couldn't run the ball at all. And Hamilton did run the ball fairly well. They had over 100 yards combined. They're just struggling right now. I don't know what the answer for them is either. So they have a few wide receivers nicked up a little bit. So, hard to say what their future is, but they're definitely not going in a positive direction. They're going down. And when you talk about Calgary, that's not a team that is used to losing.
Yeah, the bye week might be coming right at the right time for them.
Yeah. So, okay, we'll move on to our next game. And of course, this was the second of the Friday night doubleheader, and Toronto went to the Rough Riders for a battle. And what did you have a take of this game? I mean, it's like you're the guy to talk about this game because it's like both of your teams.
That's right. These are both my teams. I was really excited about this one. And, the green runs in my blood as a Rider fan, but increasingly day by day, I become a bigger Argonauts fan as well. And this Argos team is so exciting. So I was really stoked about this showdown. And I thought Toronto would come in and win this game. What did this game tell us? I think one of the things it told us is that Winnipeg clearly is in a class by themselves, having beaten Saskatchewan both of those last two games. They made Saskatchewan look not very good, but the Riders were able to come out at home and put on a performance and bring it together. And Toronto the tackling was atrocious.
And there had been the worst signs of this I've ever seen in a game. Seriously, that was bad. It was bad.
It was awful. And you'd seen signs of it in the weeks previous, the defensive backs in particular had been not wrapping up and not making the stops. And then this game, it just all became exposed. Kian Schaefer Baker, the new star in Saskatchewan, had a touchdown run for the ages, where he just ran over and through Argonauts defenders who couldn't make the tackles. And so I think that was a wake-up call to the Argonauts that they have some things that they need to work on. And for the Riders, I mean, I think they can be happy with that win. But this game this week on Friday in BC is going to be really telling, because Winnipeg has now proven to be so far ahead of everyone else in the league. But I think BC, Saskatchewan, Hamilton, Toronto are probably that next tier, with BC and Saskatchewan arguably 2A and 2B. And so that matchup this week is going to be a great one to see if Saskatchewan's as good as people maybe thought they were. And then for BC, on the other hand, having beaten Ottawa twice and having won impressively, and an impressive win in Montreal, but they've had a little bit weaker schedule. So that's going to be a really great measure, those teams taking each other on Friday night.
Yeah, absolutely. That should be an interesting game, that's for sure. Some of the telling things that I saw in this game is, number one, we had two defensive coaches leave the team before this game, so their defense played bad in a lot of phases of this game, especially in the run defense, because the run defense had been pretty solid in most of their games this week. So I don't know what defensive calls were changed or that sort of thing when you are down two defensive coaches, and it looks like they're getting another coaching change for this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see if they can put it all together, because they have the talent to put it all together. I'm just curious. They're playing at home this weekend, so on Friday night, I believe, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do. And the other thing is, Arbuckle played a tremendous game. It might not look on the scoreboard how good it was, but it was very good. And there was a throw he made midway through the game, deep ball that was dropped, that should have been caught for a touchdown, a long touchdown. That wasn't on him. It was on the Various Daniels, the receiver. He should have caught it, hit him right in the hands. And the other thing, they had like a 1st and goal, from like the 3. And when they went forward on 3rd down, they went into a shotgun to run it. This isn't the NFL. That's not going to work in the CFL, is it? Is it something that they do on the goal line, is go in the shotgun and run it out of the shotgun?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Fans always hate it and will say that they think coaches are overthinking. You do see coaches go into the shotgun on those situations occasionally. I just don't understand why. Particularly, we've seen in Toronto how well they run the quarterback sneak. Dariusz Bladek usually gives 1.5 yards or 2 yards easily for the quarterback to go behind. And so that was a really questionable call on that 3rd and goal, definitely. Yep. And it really hurt them, really cost them. And then Toronto's receivers, they let down Nick Arbuckle a little bit again, because there have been some drops on those long balls as well. So they haven't been connecting on long passes for several weeks, and their short game, the running game, the defense have been good enough, allowed them to beat Hamilton in that second game. But they're going to have to start using the weapons that they have. I mean, they have two elite receivers in Daniels and Rogers, and they are a very small part of this offense right now because they're not connecting on those longer passes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week we got Toronto goes against the Alouettes, so that should be an interesting game. And let's go ahead and head to this next game and talk about Montreal a little bit. It was BC coming into Montreal, and BC and their quarterback Mike Riley has been hot. He's been hot most of the season. He was a little injured, nicked up in that first game, but ever since then, Brian Burnham, Lucky Whitehead. Lucky Whitehead, that's a guy that is taking CFL. I'm not going to say by storm because I haven't watched the league the last few years, but it seems like this guy came from, what was it, Winnipeg? He came from Winnipeg, and he's just making plays all over the field.
Yeah, it's been so exciting to see Lucky Whitehead and with Michael Riley, that connection. And Brian Burnham is still, the one of the elite receivers in this league, but to see that connection that Riley now has with Whitehead as well, that BC has found a way to use his skill set to the max, which they weren't really doing in Winnipeg. He had a good season. I think he's already surpassed his receiving yardage with BC that he had in a almost full season with Winnipeg. And so that BC team looks really good, and Lucky Whitehead's a huge part of that. Having a player that fast, I think there are a lot of teams that are struggling right now to make big plays. We see a lot of short passing game from Saskatchewan and Toronto and Winnipeg and these teams, and right now Hamilton. And BC's looking great because they're hitting the end zone on 40, 50, 60-yard touchdown passes and longer. And I thought it's just so many great touchdowns. And when you can stretch a defense like that and you can get a secondary to need to give extra attention to someone with the speed of Whitehead, it opens everything up for everybody else and underneath. And so BC is looking like a really, really solid team. I think their defense needs some credit too. Maybe it's partly because they play so late at night quite often, but they're just not getting the press from other teams in the league too. Maybe it's been the schedule they've had as well. But Gary Peters and TJ Lee on their boundary secondary, cornerback and halfback, might be the best boundary duo in the CFL right now. They are shutting receivers down. And so, yeah, watch them. BC's looking good. It's going to be a great game on Friday.
And you will never see a better play than the 70-yard touchdown between Mike Riley and Lucky Whitehead, hitting him in stride. And I mean, it's the perfect, footwork Mike Riley had on that play and the perfect ball placement. It's just hitting him in stride. It was a thing of beauty. And that was the best play, deep ball play that I've seen this year. Just the way it developed and everything. So I'm really enjoying watching them. That's a team that kind of stands out. And they didn't even use Brian Burnham too much. He only had 3 receptions for 32 yards, and they didn't need him. But, Montreal was in this game for a while. They were absolutely in this game. They just could not convert to touchdowns. It was all field goals. I think it was 6 field goals by David Coyote. They just couldn't convert. Vernon Adams is back to, he has a great game, and then he goes to kind of struggling a little bit. I don't know if that has anything to do. Their coach was out with COVID, so I don't know if that had something to do with it or what exactly. But what was your take on Montreal struggling a little bit here?
Yeah, obviously not being able to find the end zone, as you say, it's hard to win games when you're kicking field goals all the time. And so they were able to move the ball well enough, but with as efficient as BC was playing, finding the end zone, that makes it tricky. I think Montreal can feel good about that game too, though. They have a real test on Friday as well in Toronto, with a bit of a short week too, that they need to string together, some wins now. But I think coming out of that BC game, they can feel all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. They BC is one of the better teams in the league too. So um, Winnipeg is your team to beat right now. It seems like, and we'll get into that game. And they went into Edmont. They went into Edmonton and put on a show. Basically, we had a first time starter of Taylor Cornelius, and he struggled mightily. I have a question because I know there's been CFL quarterbacks that come from the CFL and go to the NFL and has had success. But how many quarterbacks go from the NFL and go to the CFL and are successful?
Yeah, it doesn't happen that often, and there've been a lot that have come and not had success. I think part of that is needing to pay your dues in the CFL. Somebody I'm respecting a lot right now is Paxton Lynch, who's been a $1 million NFL contract quarterback who is sitting third on the depth chart in Saskatchewan right now,
Mm-hmm.
behind Isaac Harker, who went to the Colorado School of Mines. This is not the top division school. And Paxton is a team guy. He's putting in the time to learn the CFL game, learning from the two quarterbacks ahead of him, and seemingly being, humble and patient with the process. And that's the kind of player who comes in and has success, who's willing to put in the time, willing to learn, willing to work. And, it's fair that players would come and look down on the CFL given the differences in salary and hype and television exposure and fame and everything else. But these players need to learn to respect the game, that these are tremendous coaches and athletes that play in the CFL. A lot of them, they're just normal bodied humans. Athletes
Mm-hmm.
in the NFL are exceptional athletes, but also on the edge of the bell curve in every way. And so we have players who are just outstanding, but we can have a quarterback who's 5'10", be a quarterback, or an offensive tackle who is 6 feet 290 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that difference. So, but yeah, not very many quarterbacks who've had success in the NFL have come up to the CFL.
So it's pretty unique being a quarterback in the CFL. It's a different type of game. You have the wider field. I mean, there's different reads you're going to make. So it's not like you can just step in. Johnny Manziel thought he could come up to the CFL and take it by storm. And, it didn't. I don't know what went into, all the off the field stuff with him, but um, yeah, you don't just step on the field in a CFL game. Oh, I can play with these guys. I don't care what talent you have to know. It's a different kind of offense. It's different kind of defense. There are talented players in the CFL. Definitely, there are definitely talented players, and as you said, respecting the league. I think that's a big thing because I think when people say CFL or some of these smaller leagues, it may be a joke, and I'm not saying that it is a joke or anything like that, but I think it is a great league, and I think that these players that come in and they had a couple guys from Toronto from the NFL coming up this year, and not one of them. I guess the one guy who used to play with the Titans just signed to the practice squad this week, and they were supposed to be. I can't remember his name, and I should know. Um, it's just that I think that it takes a special player to play up here in Canada, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, certainly these are players who love to play the game,
Mhm.
and of course, money and family matter. But when you have guys coming to play for a salary that is often less than they could be making doing something else. These are university
Right.
graduates who have career plans beyond football.
Mm-hmm.
And so quite often players in the CFL are making less money than they could elsewhere because they love to play football and they want to win championships.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the requirements.
Nope. So this game was Winnipeg. Edmonton was close for a little bit, but it never really was that close. Edmonton really took control of this game, running the ball and passing. And Edmonton, the one positive thing that they had was James Wilder Jr. And he had he didn't touch the ball a lot. I think he had 14 carries, 71 yards, 5.1 average, and they did score 2 touchdowns. That was the bright spot of Edmonton. I don't know what's going on with them. They have a lot of talent on offense. They just haven't hit their stride. And of course, Harris being injured and on the 6-game injured list doesn't help matters. And having a backup that has no CFL experience coming in, he did struggle a little bit, but maybe he'll get better. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I think he showed some good things. I mean, and it says a lot about him that he was able to win that backup job. Dakota Prukop is the number 3 quarterback there. He has some CFL experience, but largely short yardage. I don't think he's even started a game, maybe when Toronto was really bad a few years ago. But not a lot of experience, but those years in the league and in different coaches' systems are helpful. So for Taylor Cornelius to be the backup there says something about the skill set he brings. And he is an accomplished pro, having played in the XFL, won the starting job in Tampa Bay. He actually wasn't the starter for game 1, but ended up being the starting quarterback for those 5 games, where Jamie Elizondo was the offensive coordinator. And this is Elizondo, who's the head coach of the Edmonton Elks now. So they had familiarity with one another. And I think it'll be interesting to see if Cornelius can improve his game. He had a couple of catastrophic mistakes that cost them the game, probably, with an interception deep in his own end and then a fumble on his 2-yard line that turned into a touchdown as well.
Yeah, that was an awful play. I mean, he should have just scrambled a little bit and threw it out of bounds, but he was trying to make a play and it fumbled, and that turned into a big hill touchdown. So yeah, it did have some ugly looking plays though. So
so it'll be interesting to see what happens next, because I imagine it'll be him again, and we'll see.
Yep, absolutely. So do you want to preview some of the games that are coming this week?
Yeah, we've talked about them a little bit, but we can name them. So this is an odd week in the CFL right now, week 8, where we're halfway through one game, 14-0.
It's actually, I got an update for you. It's 21.
Oh, that's great. Oh, there we go.
An interception return for a touchdown.
Oh, wow. All right.
So
not looking good for Dominic Davis then.
Yeah. J-Roll, 87-yard return for a touchdown.
Jamal Roll, he's playing. There's another boundary corner who's doing a great job as well. So there we go, 21-0 for Hamilton in that game. And then we've got another doubleheader Friday this week.
Oh, yeah.
So Montreal is in Toronto, as mentioned, and then Saskatchewan at BC in the second game. And yeah, that's a big game here in Toronto. I think Toronto's going to want to bounce back from that disappointing loss in Saskatchewan and see if they can get that offense clicking a little more and clean up those tackles on defense. They're really, really suffering with injuries right now. They have some long-term ones as well, but just nagging kind of middle of the season injuries. But they lost Cam Judge for, I'm not sure they've said yet, but there was worry worries that it was an Achilles injury and he has
Right.
not practiced. And Enoch Mwamba has not practiced this week yet either with a hamstring injury. I think he is quite doubtful. Now, we've talked about their linebacking depth in previous weeks. They will have two veterans starting in those two positions in Dexter McCoyle and Vontae Diggs, which is not much of a drop off. Those are two great linebackers. But one of the things it does, and this is one of the peculiarities of the CFL, is Enoch Mwamba and Judge are both Canadian players, so they meet that Canadian player ratio that is required. So you might look for some shuffling elsewhere in the Argonauts starting lineup. I imagine they might start Arjun Koloon, a Canadian who started in 2019 on the corner, and that's going to move some things around a little bit. Treston Deku may move inside, but that's to be determined. We'll look for the depth charts tomorrow. So there are implications with those injuries, even though there are some good players coming in to take that place.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has a potential to be, Montreal Toronto has potential to be like a shootout. I mean, both these games, they're both good matchups. That could be some interesting games. I don't think we'll get like what we had tonight. I think the good games. I'm looking forward to them, and I hope. I'm a fan of Toronto, but I'd like to see, Vernon Adams play well. I'd like to see a good game. I'd like to see the Stars play well. I'd like to see Toronto win, but I'd like to see, and yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting Friday night.
I agree. These are two really big games, I think, because these teams are all maybe not quite tied, but I think there's uncertainty as to which of these teams playing one another are better than the other. With Saskatchewan and BC both at 4-2 and having that showdown in BC. And then Toronto is 3-3 and the Alouettes are 2-3. But I think both of those teams have looked really great at times and struggled at times. Certainly Montreal is really going to be looking for a win with their head coach back. But Toronto wants to put on a good show at home too and bounce back after a tough loss in Saskatchewan. So I agree. It's a great Friday night. Hopefully they're better games than we're seeing tonight. Although, I think the weather in Toronto is supposed to be horrendous on Friday, very similar to what we're seeing in Ottawa. So
rain.
It could be a bit of dink and dunk and short passing game.
Well, we have some good running backs there.
That's true.
So on both sides, so that should be exciting.
Well, that would be nice to see a great running battle on the natural grass in the rain. That's some real fall football.
Oh yes, what's better than that? That's great. That's great. So yeah. Any final thoughts about these two games?
Yeah, not much else. I just can't wait to watch. I think they're going to give us a way clearer picture of those kind of power rankings between 2 and 8 as we sort out these 4 teams that are coming up on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and we're going to head to Fantasy Studs, Fantasy Duds. And first up, I have some fantasy studs here from this past week. If you played these guys, you were in good shape for your fantasy team. And number 1, I have Cody Vajaro, 29.28 fantasy points. He was at a $10,300 price point. Had a great game, as we all saw. Lucky Whitehead, 28.40 fantasy points. He was a 7,200 price point. You can't go wrong. Almost every game this season, Lucky White has shown up. And here's the big one, and you're going to like this one. We have Kian Schaefer Baker, 24.90 fantasy points. He only had a price of $3,700. So if you played him, you made out pretty well. So yeah. And then duds, of course. The Alouettes defense, 2 points. They were playing Mike Riley and the BC Lions, so not much to expect there, I would guess. But another is Kadeem Carey, 2.6 fantasy points. He was 7,500. That's just awful because he's had some good games this season as far as fantasy goes. And the other one is Josh Huff, which he had some good games this year so far. He only had 3 fantasy points, 5,900 price point. So any thoughts about the picks that I made there?
Yeah, those are some great picks for sure. Calgary, I find, is always really tough. You don't know what their offensive game plan is going to look like. Sometimes they run the ball and sometimes they don't. And then with their receivers, you never know if it's going to be Huff or Ambles, who's going to be the guy on any given day. So those are tough picks. But yeah, that game from Kian Schaefer Baker, what value. And then Lucky Whitehead is outperforming Brian Burnham just about every game. Yep. And yet in the salary, Whitehead gains return yardage quite often, or even touchdowns. And his salary is just creeping up at an ever slow rate that he's just outstanding value every week. So yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you had a couple in here of William Stanback.
Yeah, that's looking ahead to this week. So these are my kind of studs and duds predictions. I'll stick my neck out a little bit. But I think, in part of this, I'm going to go to Jake Wieneke first, receiver with the Montreal Alouettes, and I'm thinking that he's a stud partly because the 3 other receivers around him, or 4, have kind of been duds with the number of times they have dropped the ball in the last 3 games or all year long. Eugene Lewis really struggled with some drops last week, and he had become as reliable as Wieneke with Quan Bray, who ended up off the roster, but Quan Bray had with a number of drops, and Cunningham as well. Dante Absher has like a catch or a couple of catches in all of the games he's played, so doesn't seem to be a go-to guy or well down in the reads for the receiver. And when Vernon Adams is such a guy who runs on confidence, you know that he's going to want to be able to throw the ball to guys who are reliable with their hands. And it seems like Jake Wieneke is the guy that's left who not yet has not had any terrible drops and has managed to make some exceptional catches, maybe the catch of the year this year. And his price point is creeping up. This week he's at $8,073. And yet I think that could still be a good pick, partly because, as I said, I think there might need to be some shuffling in that Argonauts field side secondary because of the ratio implications of the injuries to Mwamba and Judge. So I like Wieneke, and then I like Stanback for the same reason. You're losing probably the best run-stopping middle linebacker in the CFL in Enoch Mwamba in Toronto, and Judge is also an outstanding run stopper. As mentioned, the 2 Diggs and McCoyle are great, and yet you'd have to think with all those personnel shifts due to injuries that Stanback might have a game. Plus, it might be an ugly night with rain, so I think Stanback's a great price there. And he's at 8,005. Sometimes we see these running backs closer to 10,000. So I think Stanback and Wieneke for Montreal are both studs. And that's not saying that I think Montreal is even going to win that game, but I think there's great potential for those 2 players.
Absolutely.
And duds this week, I'm going to pick an Argonaut from that game as well, Tavares Daniels, who you noted the drop last week. I think there are a few things coming into play with this one. First of all, Arbuckle quite often is looking to the wide side of the field. And prefers interior receivers very clearly. Tavares Daniels started at the highest salary in week 1 with Bryant Burnham and Greg Ellingson, as a $10,000 receiver. And week by week, as Daniels continues to catch a couple balls a game, his salary keeps dropping. But I still think that's a dud. And another reason I think that is because Taekwon Glass, who is Montreal's corner, had 0 passes attempted against him playing the boundary corner in BC. And so I don't know where Whitehead's 6 or 7 catches for over 100 yards came from, but they weren't against Taekwon Glass. 0 catches on 0 attempts. And he would be lining up against Daniels. So I think that's another reason Daniels is a dud. And then our game tonight, Daniel Peterman, who's been bumped to a backup role in the receiving core in Ottawa. He's quite often a good value pick. Not a huge point getter, but usually good for a good number of catches, as he's a second down conversion kind of guy, but has fallen into a backup role. So those are my picks for this week.
And actually, your pick of Daniel Peterman you're spot on at the moment, because he doesn't have anything, no targets or anything. So that's a pretty spot on. So how did you do in your fantasy lineup this week? Did you
this past week it wasn't great. In the various groups I'm in, it was kind of middle of the pack.
I did awful. I think this is an example of, don't do what I say, don't do as I do type of thing, because I tried to do some different things to put higher price guys in skill positions, and I went a little low on the quarterback. I probably went a little too low, because I started Taylor Cornelius, which had 6 fantasy points.
Oh yeah,
Bad idea. I did have James Wilder, DJ Foster in there. I stuck in Chandler Worthy. He had 9.6 fantasy points, and they need to get him the ball more. Toronto, he's a weapon. He's definitely
totally right.
And then I started Lamar Durant, who has a big nothing, and I don't know if he was injured or what for the BC Lions, but yeah, that was bad. And then Toronto was my defense, which that was bad. Bad picks this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. I had 2 excellent picks in Whitehead and Wilder. You probably had those too, and then the rest were duds for me. I thought Curly Gittens might have a game against Saskatchewan. He'd been more and more a part of the offense in the previous weeks, and I thought he'd get lots of looks. He had 1 catch for 6 yards. I also took Taylor Cornelius, big 6 points with those 3 interceptions. And I had taken Jamal Morrow as a value pick with Saskatchewan. Just didn't. I mean, part of that was assuming he'd be returning a lot of kickoffs, because Toronto would be scoring points, and Toronto didn't score very many points. So it wasn't a great week last week.
No.
Right.
And I tell you what's really difficult that I've found is, on the CFL.ca fantasy, they have 2 running back spots. And if you go to DraftKings, they have 1 running back spot. It's hard to pick 2 running backs, because there's not a ton of running backs that are going to actually get yardage in the CFL. And the better ones are at the higher salary. And you almost have to pick, 1 half decent one, and then try your luck on a lower one to get any decent wide receivers in there. So that's been the challenge for me is I usually pick 1 decent running back and then somebody else and see how that goes. But that's been a challenge, because, a few of these teams have a single rusher that they get all the rushes and they get all the yards. But there are a couple that BC, namely, is a team that hasn't ran the ball great, and they haven't used the same guy. It's like multiple people. I mean, their leading rusher might be 30 some yards. I don't know what it was this past week, but yeah, that's been a challenge.
That is really tough with the CFL fantasy and the two running backs. You're absolutely right because you can't take two of Wilder, Harris, and Stanback because that's going to cost you over 20,000. And then if you want, Riley and Burnham as well. So yeah, I really have to look. And that second running back pick is really tricky. There have been times when I've left that spot open just because feels better. I will either leave the second running back spot open, or sometimes I'll leave the defense spot open because, as we both suffered last week, we had 2 points from a defense. And did you know that defenses can get negative points as well if they're really bad? Which has happened to me before too. And once that happens, you never want to take a defense again.
I imagine if you put like 40 or 50 up on a defense, they're not going to score too many points. So.
Yeah. And yet you can hit a home run with the defense too. I think it was BC Ottawa a few weeks ago. BC defense had 24 points or something like that. So defenses are tough to pick too. And that second running back slot, those are tricky.
No, when I was building my lineup with the first game of the season, I go in there and I'm familiar with some of the guys, but I haven't watched them play per se before live. And they had, who was it? Brandon Banks was in there, $14,000. I said, oh, he must be good. I'll put him in, and then I'll put, who was it? Bo Levi Mitchell. I'll put him in, and then I'm looking at my salary. I said, I barely have anything left for anybody else. So it has been a challenge. It's been fun, but it definitely is a challenge to do that, especially when you have 9 teams compared to the NFL. It's like you do fantasy for that. You it's a little bit easier. Here it's much more of a challenge, that's for sure.
Yeah, those low dollar picks are where I find the fantasy to be really enjoyable. That Kian Schaefer Baker pick last week, or I have Stephen Dunbar tonight, who scored the touchdown. Maybe won't get many more points than that, but those guys, new receivers coming in, or guys getting their first shot in a starting role. I love when they're 2,500 or 3,000, and if you can hit a home run on one of those guys, you're going to end up doing okay because half of the players are going to take Michael Riley and Whitehead or Burnham and Stanback, right?
Oh, right.
So those secondary picks at that lower dollar amount, those are the ones that really make or break, and that's fun trying to figure out who are going to be the good ones.
And I've never thought of the strategy of leaving one spot open and like filling better players in the other spot. So that's an interesting strategy, I have to say, because I would always fill all my spots, but yeah, that is interesting. So yeah, another fun week, and we do have the CFL Fantasy League. I think there's like 4 or 5 of us on there in the 3-minute warning league, and that's fun. Me and you, I think, are on the bottom, but it's fun. It's fun to do. So
yeah, we don't want to intimidate anyone. So if you and I are not very good, maybe we'll get some more people to join us. But if you're listening, look up 3-minute warning on both CFL Fantasy and TSN CFL Pick'em. We haven't mentioned tonight. That's an easier game where you just pick the team game winners, but you can wager confidence and predict the score as well. And there's a scoring system to go with that, but we've got a league for that one as well. So look up both of those and join our leagues. They're free to play. Yep. And it just makes following the league so much more interesting as you get to learn the different players and know who's hot and who's not,
right?
Who's a stud and who's a dud.
So this podcast that you're listening to right now, it's an audio podcast also. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Podbean. You can find it anywhere. So, and we do stream on Facebook for the All Plays All Sports Network. So yeah, this is we're getting out there. We're getting a lot of good feedback too. Interesting feedback from people. It's like a little, it feels pretty good. I mean, we just threw this podcast together like 3 days or 4 days before we actually recorded, so it's pretty exciting to get, feedback. What did you think about that?
Yeah, it's really great. It's really great to see more followers and to get some comments back and to be connecting with the other CFL podcasting
Yep,
community members as well, which is, a really cool community. I think there are so many great fans out there who give so much time and energy
absolutely.
to create their own shows and getting great guests on and connecting with the other people who do the same. So there's no kind of competition and one-upmanship and whatever else. This
Nope.
is a really tight community, especially during playoff time at Grey Cup and everything else. They all the podcasters get together and just share in that love and passion for the CFL. So I'm really happy that we're starting to get involved there as well. And I think we've got a bit of a unique take with you and I together, Bill, that we're kind of
Mhm.
targeting the American football fan a little bit and seeing if we can draw some people to the CFL, which is really neat. And I want to thank you for that because this was your idea. And I think it's so awesome to have a fan in the United States who's really looking to the CFL with interest. It's fun doing this with you, and I'm really glad.
Absolutely, and I think the biggest thing, talking about American fans, the biggest thing, they have college football here, they have the NFL here, and it's like, it's okay to watch and enjoy another league. It's okay, you know? These athletes that don't make it in the NFL, don't make it in other places, come to the Canadian Football League. A lot of times it's not based on talent. It's based on opportunity. And I've been saying this before that, sometimes you don't get the opportunity to showcase your skills. And for one, DJ Foster, for an example, he was in Arizona, he was in New England, but he has talent. He has a lot of talent. And I think the Canadian Football League has a lot of talent. And I think you're really missing out if you're not paying attention to this league. I just think that. And I hopefully we get more and more people to come across, and you watch games almost every night of the weekend with college and everything. These games are just exciting. Maybe not tonight, but these games are pretty exciting.
Well, we'll get back to this one anyway, so we can watch the end. But it's
Yep.
been great doing another show, and thanks to all our listeners tonight. You're
Absolutely.
listening to 3 Minute Warning. This is a Canadian Football League podcast with Bill Beer and Dallas Bergen on the All Sports All Plays Network. And you can hear us usually Wednesdays at 8 p.m. live and watch all the places where you get your podcasts the following day.
We will see you later.